I'm David Hutchins with VOA's Middle East Monitor. Coming up, SCAF does not back down, and neither does Egypt's youth. So what next? An ex-Syrian soldier tells us why he defected. And Yemen violence continues despite Saleh's agreement to step down from power eventually. It's all ahead on The Voice of America. Egypt's military rulers have rejected a demand from protesters to immediately step down, saying the move would amount to a betrayal of the people's trust. Leaders of the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces announced the decision in a news conference today. They also apologized for the deaths of at least 35 people in a series of clashes between security forces and demonstrators this week. The apology was issued as a fragile truce took hold in Cairo's Tahrir Square, which had been a flashpoint for the violent skirmishes between police and protesters, calling for the country's military rulers to step down immediately. The unrest had continued in spite concessions that were announced earlier this week by Field Marshal Hossein Tantawi. The head of the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, or SCAF, pledged to speed the transition to civilian rule with presidential elections before July 2012. Also, parliamentary elections are set to begin on Monday. Tantawi pledged the polls would go forward as planned. Now, to provide some analysis with me on the line is Elizabeth Errett, our Cairo correspondent. Welcome, Elizabeth, again.
Good to be with you, Hutch.
Hey, so SCAF has said basically it will not step down in the near future, and the protesters have been saying all week that they have to. So what does that mean days before the election?
Well, it doesn't. It obviously stands unresolved, and tomorrow the protesters are planning another really big day, and Fridays generally after midday prayers tend to be a rallying point, and this latest round started after last Friday's big rally. That was Islamist. This seems to be more of the original revolutionary forces that we saw back in January. They're saying that it's their last chance Friday, that they're going to give the military one more day to step down. That seems really unlikely. There is actually going to be a counter rally, evidently, by Islamist groups who have sort of more aligned with the SCAF, but we'll see how that all plays out. Now, what that means in terms of the next few days, it's not clear. Today was quite calm, and that's a good thing, obviously, for everybody involved. What they will do if the SCAF doesn't stand down tomorrow, I assume more people will just continue to stay there. But it's small enough, and the elections could continue to go ahead. It's Cairo and a few other places that will be beginning these elections on Monday.
Now, interesting, I want to highlight what you just said. Conventional wisdom suggests that the Muslim Brotherhood and their Freedom and Justice Party will do well should the elections go forward, because they've always had a certain popular support. And is that part of the reason why they are talking with the military and actually scheduling a counter-protest? Because the idea is if the elections go as planned, that they'll do very well and come out better for it politically?
Yeah, that's very much what a lot of people are saying, and that in almost to the detriment, they're saying, that the Muslim Brotherhood's in cahoots against the revolutionary principles, and they're undercutting the protests by doing this. And it is true. It's all along they have certainly been the best organized, as even when they were, oppressed under the Mubarak government, they still, through the mosques, held not political, but held a fair amount of power. And so they were able to carry that through to these current elections. Most of the more newer forces that we're seeing, it's only been, 9-10 months since the revolution. They haven't really had a lot of time to form grassroots campaign countrywide. So it's in the interest of the Muslim Brotherhood to go ahead with these elections now, and they appear to be helping SCAF keep everything on schedule so that they do go ahead.
Right. Now, you mentioned in the most recent report that you did that there are basically there's some basic forces. We mentioned the Islamic groups, Muslim Brotherhood, but there are also some other groups out there. Secular liberals, and that might include youth, that might include former members of the NDP, and, of course, the military. Now, it appears that the military, at least for the short term, wants to remain dominant, and depending on the outcome of the elections, would basically remain ascendant to these two forces until a president presumably would take that power. Do you think that that's what really is taking place here?
Well, yeah, people I've talked to, various analysts, they do think there is this tactical alliance between SCAF and, say, the Muslim Brotherhood, and that if the Muslim Brotherhood are prominent in parliament, that they can actually form the committee that they'll have more influence in the committee that will draft the Constitution, and then they hope in the Constitution there'll be some protections for the military and keep their autonomy much as they have had for decades. Now, the only problem with that is that if indeed the Muslim Brotherhood comes into the fore, it's unlikely in the long term that's a very useful alliance. I mean, they're very, very much at odds in terms of their vision for a future. The military is very, very statist in many ways, but if the Muslim Brotherhood or the Salafist parties, they want some radical changes. Nobody's really expecting any party to be terribly dominant. It's quite scattered. Muslim Brotherhood hasn't even put up candidates in a lot of the places, but it's not clear what their powers will be. People are saying, actually, this is not the most important election. It's just the start. It'll get people kind of a little bit arranged, and then the next time, for the next parliament, it'll be much more important. But just going through the process, they think, is what's key, and why even people who might be suspicious of the Brotherhood or the SCAF and supportive of the protesters in Tahrir in many ways, but just want to see this all keep going forward rather than another excuse to stall out.
Well, please stay safe with your reporting, Elizabeth. That's VOA's Elizabeth Arrett in Cairo. And we'll look forward to your tweets on Twitter that you can follow her at VOA Arrett. That's VOAARROTT. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Moving to Syria now, Arab League foreign ministers have given Syria until Friday to sign an agreement allowing observers into the country. Reuters is reporting that Turkey is considering creating a buffer zone inside Syria to accommodate growing numbers of refugees. The Free Syrian Army, which has set up a base in Turkey's frontier Hatay province, say that if Turkey were to set up a buffer zone, the Assad regime wouldn't last more than a week because defectors would have a safe place to gather and organize. Already we're hearing that hundreds of defectors have traveled to the border area. The Free Syrian Army says it has some 15,000 among its rank, with more defections happening by the day. With me in the studio now is senior reporter Cecily Hillary, and also joined by phone from northern Lebanon is Super Stringer reporter Jeff Newman. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks.
So, Cecily, let me talk with you first. You had a chance to speak with one of these defectors by cell phone yesterday. What can you tell us about his story?
Yeah, Captain Iyad he's about 30 years old. He's in Rastan. We spoke last evening. That's a town, as you know, that's a real stronghold for the opposition, and we've seen a lot of defections there. He announced his defection this week in a video on YouTube, invoking God and the Quran. He said he was joining up with the Khalid bin Walid Brigade under the Free Syrian Army, and he was basically issuing a call for other officers to do the same.
Now, what drove this man to defect?
In talking to him, it came out that it was mostly a moral and religious decision. He said armies exist to protect people from injustice and tyranny, not to help perpetrate it. He's very devout, and I think what really triggered him off was the fact that they were asked to destroy mosques. He says this hasn't happened in 1,400 years of Islam, and it shouldn't happen now. And also, apparently his father, who's an elderly man, a lawyer for the state, and a stroke victim, was arrested and detained for 2 months and tortured. So this really took him over the edge.
Now, how closely do these brigades work with the Free Syrian Army?
Well, I asked him because I've had some doubts. The Free Syrian Army claims to have thousands and thousands of troops, and but based in Turkey, one wonders how much coordination they can really have. He said that they were definitely coordinating with the FSA. They were under them, and they work as he put it, one man. I asked him specifically if they were looking for international help, and he says, contrary to all the rumors, Syrians, the Free Army, are not receiving any outside help, and they're looking for international protection. He is in favor of isolated areas set up to protect the civilians and dissidents from the army, especially a no-fly zone to protect from air raids.
Now, Jeff, you are in northern Lebanon at the moment, and you've been visiting hospitals and clinics where Syrians have been treated for injuries. Tell me the scene there.
Well, the people I've met are being treated in hospitals across the Akka region along Lebanon's northern border with Syria. Conditions in the hospital are good, but most of the injuries are critical. Several people were shot by snipers. One man I met was standing about 3 feet away from a mortar shell that exploded while he was standing on a street. He had severe wounds from his neck all the way down to his ankles, and he was barely conscious. It took him about 4 days to get across the border and into Lebanon to the hospital. Mostly, several different smugglers helped him get across, and a taxi driver kind of dragged him off the street when he was first injured.
Has anyone told you about what they were fleeing in the western part of Syria?
Well, most of the stories are pretty similar to what we've been hearing for 8 months now. The villages and cities are under constant threat from the Syrian army, whether it's snipers making streets impassable or heavy bombardment from artillery and tanks. Little has changed since the uprising has begun, but casualties are mounting.
Great, thanks. Reporters Cecily Hillary and Jeff Newman. This week, the head of a special commission investigating Bahrain's unrest says the government used excessive force and tortured detainees during its bloody crackdown on protesters earlier this year. Commission Chief Sharif Bassiouni announced Wednesday that the investigation did not find evidence linking Iran to the uprising. Bahrain's rulers have blamed Iranian interference for stirring up the unrest. The much-anticipated report about the treatment of demonstrators in Shiite-led protests calling for democratic reform found that at least 35 people were killed during the unrest, including some security force members. The report was authorized by Bahrain's Sunni monarchy and was based on interviews with more than 5,000 people. Joining me now for analysis on what the report means for democratic aspirations in Bahrain is Salman Sheikh, director of the Brookings Doha Center, a think tank based in Qatar. Welcome.
Good morning, or good evening.
So many of our Bahrain audience members on our MiddleEastVoices.com and our radio program who listen to us have said this year that this revolt began peacefully but was taken over by violent Shia who wanted to overthrow the monarchy. And there is evidence, video and otherwise, suggests there was unwarranted violence on both sides. But according to the report, and I'm going to quote here, the evidence presented to the commission by the government of Bahrain on the involvement by the Islamic Republic of Iran in the internal affairs of Bahrain does not establish a discernible link between specific incidents that occurred in Bahrain during February and March of 2011. Do you think that the fact that the commission actually said there is no link will put this to rest? Because there seems to be a lot of people who support the monarchy who say that Iran is trying to stir up trouble.
Well, it should, and there have been a number of other noticeable statements which have been made before, and off-the-record statements, including by American officials, which have pointed to that. But I don't think it will. In fact, today, members of the ruling family and the authorities in Bahrain have still been questioning that aspect of the report and still pointing to an Iranian hand in the protest.
What evidence is there that there might be a link?
Well, the only evidence that has really been clearly stated is the evidence of satellite television channels, particularly Al-Manar and others which are Shia, inciting protests. But other than that, there is really no credible evidence pointing to financing or funding of specific activities to do with the protests which started in February, March. And this is, I think, a point which privately I would say that U.S. officials also make.
Final question. Do you think this closes the lid on any second Pearl Revolution? Or if it does, in whose mind? The Shiite are still protesting.
I think we're at a very early stage, but we're at a critical stage after the report's release. In fact, I believe we have very limited amount of time to turn the corner on the crisis. The report itself presents an opportunity for practical reforms in the judicial and in the law and order areas and the security areas in Bahrain. But more than that, it presents an opportunity for political groupings to come together. But if that mood is soured by events on the ground and by what is perceived as in practice a lack of commitment to implementing the report's recommendations, then I fear we may actually see a worsening of this crisis in Bahrain.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. Salman Sheikh, director of Brookings Doha Center.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Conscientious objectors to Turkey's National Army service face years in jail, often brutalized by fellow inmates for being traitors. But the government, under pressure from the European Court of Human Rights, has indicated that it may allow conscientious objections. Dorian Jones reports from Istanbul that the issue has provoked a storm of controversy.
Street parties like this one are a common occurrence for young men heading off for their obligatory 18 months in the army, and many regard serving in the military as an honour, as this man explains.
İçimde korku yok. Hatta şey vardı, ben bunu gördüm. Keşke bir önce gitsem vardı. Korku yok Allah'a şükür.
He says he's excited to go and he thanks God. He does not have any fear of dying. He says the biggest reward in the army is to die there and to be a martyr. And that's why he has no fear. He says he's only afraid of making his family sad. But a handful of conscientious objectors who challenge such patriotic views face the full force of the Turkish state. In central Istanbul, several hundred protesters demonstrate against the imprisonment of conscientious objectors. This protester says anyone who refuses to do military service faces a lifetime of persecution.
So he's being arrested, and then he's released because he serves his sentence, and then he's picked up by the military police again, claiming he's running away from the army, and he says he's not running away from the army, he's just refusing, he's not running anywhere, and he's put to jail again, and he's tried again. This goes on and on and on, and this means it's a terrible vicious circle because it means a life sentence practically. I mean, he can never come back home.
The repeated imprisonment of conscientious objectors has resulted in Turkey being in violation of rules by the European Court of Human Rights on numerous occasions. Mehmet Tarhan is one of the country's most famous conscientious objectors, serving numerous prison sentences. He still faces the prospect of further jail time. While he welcomes the government moves, he remains cautious.
Avrupa Konseyi Bakanlar Komitesi Türkiye'ye süre vermişti. Aralık sonuna kadar zaten bir düzenleme yaptı.
He says the European Council gave a deadline for Turkey to introduce reform until December. Turkey kept saying to the Council that it's making preparations every 3 months. So he says we will see the outcome of this last 5 years of preparation. Those who are against allowing conscientious objection could bring the measure to a halt. The leader of the far-right Nationalist Action Party, Devlet Bahçeli, launched an attack on the government, accusing it of betraying the army as it continues to fight against the Kurdish rebel group, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK.
Toprak bütünlüğünü koruma yolunda azgın terörle mücadelesini sürdürdüğü bir ortamda.
He said that there cannot be a more tactless behaviour than a minister bringing to the agenda conscientious objection at a time when the Turkish army is trying to protect the unity of the territory by fighting an excessive terror. The Minister of Defence is on record as saying he strongly opposes the reform. With conscientious objection recognised across Europe and even national service seen increasingly outdated, observers say it seems Turkey is swimming against the tide. Political columnist Murat Belge says reform is key to modernising Turkish society, although he warns it involves challenging one of its most sacred traditions.
And the Turkish nation state was formed, first of all, by the efforts of the military. So we all have to be soldiers, but already as Turks we are born soldiers. One after the other, they all keep on saying the same things. I mean, this is the ideology.
Both sides now seem to be digging in for what is expected to be a bitter and protracted struggle. Observers say the outcome is being seen as a key test of the government's commitment to modernising Turkish society. Dorian Jones for VOA News, Istanbul, Turkey.
At least 5 protesters were killed and scores other wounded Thursday in the Yemeni capital Sana'a after gunmen in civilian clothes opened fire on them. Violence broke out despite the signing Wednesday by Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh of a plan to hand over power and hold new elections in 3 months' time. Edward Uranian reports for VOA from Cairo.
Witnesses say gunmen in tribal attire opened fire on the crowd of mostly young protesters Thursday after they began marching from their main encampment at what is now called Change Square. Arab satellite channels said the shootings took place as the protesters began marching in the direction of the presidential palace. Journalist Tom Finn also tweeted that thousands of angry men marched out of Change Square, saying they're heading for the palace. Al Arabiya TV showed video of the bodies of 5 dead protesters, along with images of ambulances ferrying wounded protesters to hospitals. Yemen's President Ali Abdullah Saleh, who signed the Gulf Cooperation Council plan Wednesday to transfer power to his vice president, along with new presidential elections in 3 months, condemned the killings and ordered an investigation into what happened. Hakim al-Masmari, who is editor-in-chief of the Yemen Post newspaper, insists that supporters of President Saleh are behind the shootings.
The government wants people to feel that if Saleh leaves, everything will turn chaotic. Most of the protests today blamed the ruling family for the attacks, and eyewitnesses said that they saw these gunmen escape the scene of the attack in government vehicles.
A top Interior Ministry official denied that the government was responsible for Thursday's violence. Hakim al-Masmari says that despite the signing of the GCC peace accord, President Saleh's son and nephews still control much of the country's military apparatus, leaving Mr. Saleh with many levers of power.
Saleh's sons and nephews control over 300,000 troops right now, over 80,000 Central Security Forces, over 110,000 Republican Guards, the Special Forces, the counter-terror units. These are still all under control of the ruling family. We cannot consider the Saleh regime over until these forces are out of their hands. If not, it does not differ whether Saleh is out of rule or not, because he indirectly controls most parts of the military.
President Saleh is the 4th Arab leader who will have been forced to leave office this year. He is expected to travel from Saudi Arabia to the United States for medical treatment soon, before settling in an unspecified Gulf country. Edward Uranian for VOA News, Cairo.
Libya's transitional leaders swore on a Quran to uphold the ideals of the revolution that toppled Muammar Gaddafi as they took their oaths of office today, another key step in the country's hoped-for march toward democracy. The lineup of relative unknowns, almost all of them older men, will confront daunting challenges like establishing control over the fractured nation after the ousting of Gaddafi's 42-year regime. Prime Minister Abdurrahim al-Kaib took his vow before the Transitional Council leaders Mustafa Abdel-Jalil. He then placed his hand on an ornately decorated Quran and swore to remain loyal to the goals of the revolution. Al-Kaib said he and his ministers were upbeat and optimistic about leading Libya toward elections scheduled to take place next June. And finally, a court in Egypt has ordered the release of 3 U.S. students arrested during a protest in Cairo, a lawyer confirmed today. Derek Sweeney, Luke Gates, and Gregory Porter, who attend the American University in Cairo, were arrested on the roof of a university building near the city's Tahrir Square on Sunday. Officials accuse them of throwing firebombs at security forces, fighting with protesters. Attorney Ted Simon, who represents the 19-year-old Porter, said he is still waiting to learn whether the students have been set free. Sweeney's mother, Joy Sweeney, said she is absolutely elated at the news of her 19-year-old son's release. This has been VOA's Middle East Monitor. Join us Monday through Friday for news from the region, inches to the region. Happy Thanksgiving. Also, International Addiction is next. Thanks for tuning in.
Are you following the uprisings in Syria, Egypt, and other Arab Spring countries? Want to contribute? Voice of America has launched a new social journalism website for the Arab Spring called Middle East Voices. Incubated by our thousands of fans on Facebook and Twitter and dedicated journalists at VOA, this site takes a new approach to covering the region through investigative journalism, publishing your viewpoints and harnessing social media to tell stories in a new, innovative way. Become a contributor at MiddleEastVoices.com.